From the RSNA, this is the Radiology Artificial Intelligence Podcast. My name is Paul Yi, and I'm a radiologist and co-host of the podcast.
And my name is Ali Tejani, and I'm a radiologist and co-host of the podcast. Each month, we dive into the hottest topics in radiology AI and talk with leading experts, thought leaders, and movers and shakers in the field.
All right, welcome everyone back to the Radiology AI podcast. It's been a while since you've had both of our hosts on with you. We've got a growing team, and it's been a pleasure seeing everyone and hearing from all the fantastic guests. This is a little special, I think, because Paul, I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you since RSNA. I think that was the last time where we connected on all things AI and more.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Ali. I had a suspicion that maybe the AI agents were recording in the background, but I guess not. So it's good to be back here, live and in person, and emphasis on the person.
Yeah, there's a moment where I thought there were episodes being released with our voices and our likeness, but glad to say that there's still a human touch. There's that human element that's just a little special. You can't replace it.
Yeah, but Ali, how do I know that I'm actually talking to you and not just the avatar?
It's almost like Inception. There has to be some sort of giveaway, some sort of clue. So
Tell me something only Ali would know.
that's I really wish I could have said something on the spot there, but it's really sad that I can't. Let's see.
That's fair.
I'm going to avoid that just because we'll come back to it later.
All right, we'll do it offline. I'm convinced.
The lack of a response might be the indicator itself. Well, Paul, this is a really special episode, as we were saying, and I think it's really exciting to have really a luminary in our field with us. Can you guess? Or I guess you already see it. You know who's here, so not much of a surprise. But
Is this my Turing test now?
this is your Turing test. That's right.
I see a man wearing glasses with a headset.
And he's making moves in AI and changing up our field in terms of innovation, bringing in new ideas and supporting up and coming groups. And so, Jesse, it's fantastic to have you here with us today. Thank you for everything that you've done for our field. And then thanks for taking the time to tell us more about what you've been up to, both in radiology and beyond.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation for both of you, Ali and Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Great to have you.
Yeah, likewise. Fantastic to have you. And I think, Jesse, let's just jump into it. I mean, you had many years in academic radiology, lots of success in pediatric radiology and in working with operations and some technology that was deployed in practice. We want to hear your origin story. Tell us more about how you found yourself moving from academic radiology to the venture side. Tell us that journey and what it looked like.
Definitely. So, I've always had an interest in the innovation side of things. As an attending at UCSF, I came here for my training and then stayed on faculty at UCSF. Was there for about 15 years before moving into my role. But I always had an interest in taking new things, new ideas, and bringing them into whether it be resident education, using flipped classroom or gamification, or taking some new idea and trying to apply it. And it was around 2016 or so that was actually at RSNA, was at a course, or it was more of just a seminar about innovation and about entrepreneurship. And so, yeah, about 2016 or so. And then I really got interested, in the idea of could I do this? Is this something that I could do? It's really a novel way of applying your ideas as a physician and taking things into new medical product or new idea. And so sort of the timing worked out well that at UCSF, they were also holding this course called the Startup 101 course. So I took that and it really opened my eyes to a new field, a new area of ways that you can take what you know as a physician and bringing that into something for a product that many other people can use. So I started my first startup. It was an augmented reality and pre-surgical planning space, Sierra Medical. Bought my first HoloLens, did my first code and created our first prototype of the app. And that was from there, we got enough funding to take it to continually just building off to the next level and the next level. We got funding, took it through FDA, 510K clearance, and got initial customers. It was really during that time, though, that, I saw the interest in that, as a physician, I can help, locally, I can help impact the people day to day in my community. Entrepreneur, I can take things even one level higher. I can take things more broadly. But the idea of innovation was and venture investing was really interesting to me because I have multiple shots on goal, multiple ways to be able to take the things that I've learned, both as a practicing physician, as an innovator, as a radiologist, and help others to take their ideas from something that's just in their head to something that's an actual product that people can use. So was able to then work a lot with the local accelerators here, both in mentorship at the Plug and Play Tech Center, at Innovation Ventures, to really start to learn and understand this other side of things. And then stepped away from UCSF to really sort of go fully in on the idea. Got into VC Lab, which is like an accelerator for venture capital funds, and allowed me to then take this to something that is more sort of full-fledged. For me, I think it was just really taking the idea in the sort of the education, the teacher's part as well. So mentoring and helping others to take their ideas and make them real. And so that's the really thing that's really exciting for me.
Thank you, Jesse. And honestly, I think there's so much to talk about here that we may have to start doing multiple episodes or a series just to keep our finger on the pulse through you. So before we jump into your thoughts, the trends, and your approach to this new role, just for those of us who may not be as experienced in this space, can you tell us what is venture? When people say venture capital, VC, what does that mean, and what's the general approach to this, but whether it's radiology, medicine, or even a non-health sector?
No, it's a great question. I mean, it was something that when I started, I didn't really have a familiarity with it. I heard about it, buzzwords, and sometimes not so kind things about VCs. And so I think hearing about what it is, and really essentially it's an asset class. It is a class of things in the way that you would sort of think about investing in real estate or stocks or these type of things. It's one type of asset class where in this case, you have a pool of capital that's contributed by what we call the limited partners, and they put in money into this pool of capital. The general partner, the person who is the one who's charged with managing the capital, picking the startups to invest in, balancing the portfolio, such that they get returns for their investors, their limited partners. So in many ways, the general partner is a money manager. But in the sense of investing in any sector, the general partner, you're thinking about them, do they have expertise in the area, or do they have some knowledge about these types of things that they're investing in, so that they can take the capital that goes from the amount put in to a large return. And so in that sense, that's what it is in sort of a nutshell. Is it's an investment class that allows people to invest into areas that they're interested in. So being either individual people who invest into the fund or large institutions that invest into a fund. And what they are doing then is looking to get returns over usually a 10-year period or so. That's usually how long a single fund will be, is over a 10-year horizon. So in general, that's what that is.
Thank you. It helps to have that context. And I think as we go forward here, we may stop you just for some definitions and some general terms. Can you tell us more about the day-to-day in your role?
Certainly. So, I think there's a number of things that you're doing in VC world. It's the idea is that you're sourcing. So you're meeting new companies, you're meeting new people who could potentially introduce you to new companies, so that you can have very diversified portfolio, a lot of different types of startups that you're choosing to invest in potentially. So a lot of time spent either, reading up on the latest types of innovations, meeting people who are at innovation or incubator hubs and seeing what types of things that they're seeing. So there's a lot of getting yourself out there and learning about new things and reading about the topics, talking to the startups themselves and seeing, looking at the founders and seeing, do they have these elements that you think might be worth taking a second conversation? The diligence piece. So say you've got a startup that you're looking at, now you're taking a deeper dive. So spending a lot of time going into the nuts and bolts of it, looking at the publications, reading about the topic, talking to key opinion leaders about, is this something that could be successful? There's a lot of that. And also working with the people who have invested into your fund, making sure that there's questions that they have, managing those type of expectations. There's a lot in those various things where you're applying what you know and seeing if this would be a good fit for the potential for the fund. So a lot of both virtual and in-person meetings. So, for me as sort of an introvert, it's kind of interesting because I tend to, it's challenging for me to sometimes be in a large room with lots of people, but I find that you can find ways to navigate it, to find people that you can speak to one-on-one, or I don't think it necessarily you have to be an extrovert, an outgoing personality type or anything like that. I think you can fit with, you just make it work for yourself and doing what you can do. So for me, it's a lot of fun. I think that's usually what I tell trainees with anything is that it shouldn't feel like work. It should feel like something you enjoy doing, and it should just something that you're excited to get up and do during the daytime, and rather than it feeling like a chore. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what I'm doing is just, meeting people, learning about new things. I think that's probably the most exciting thing is, learning about what is on the cutting edge and what are people doing that are right there on the sort of the bleeding edge of technology.
I think I'm sold. Sounds like a lot of fun. Sounds really exciting. One question I think a lot of radiologists might have is how risky is this? Can you still practice? Can you do it part time? Maybe a question for you is, are you still practicing radiology? And what do you think about the whole possibilities of maintaining a practice?
I think, and this is kind of an interesting thing that I've done a couple posts about, is that there is a opportunity cost in radiology, and perhaps this is why, like a lot of we don't see as many radiologists necessarily going into entrepreneurship or other types of things because your earning potential as a radiologist is such that it's tricky to find something that necessarily will match that. So for me, I stepped away. I worked now about 30 hours per week or so remotely with a private group, just doing remote only reading. That gives me enough one to keep my hand in the field and so that I can kind of see the problems, see the challenges. I think that has been actually really beneficial for me to inform some decisions and those types of things. But with my startup, I had tried to do sort of a foot in two worlds where I'm doing both academic chief of radiology and doing my startup. And I just found like I couldn't really fully make things progress as quickly as I had wanted to. And so, for this, I decided to step away enough that I could focus mostly on this, but still have enough one to supplement my day to day so that, I can make sure that the kids have a roof over their head and those type of things. But at the same time that I have less of the administrative things that I can really focus on building this. So, I think it is something, it's possible to do it for sure. I think some people had asked me like, are you having midlife crisis or something like that? And I'm like, no, not really. I just pursuing something that I feel like is really, it's more of a pull than really a push away from something. So for me, I thought, it is doable. I've had other people ask me, like, how can you sort of escape the matrix, as they say? And like, it is possible. You just have to find those ways that can sort of balance what your needs are versus what interests are.
Yeah, so it sounds like less of a midlife crisis, but more like a midlife evolution.
I know I didn't go buy a Ferrari or anything like that, right?
Maybe a somewhat of a controversial question. Would you invest in a radiologist doing a startup who wasn't going full time? Or let's say going like 80% time?
I think the challenge would be that, like, are they sort of at a point where they have to succeed? I mean, really sort of, they talk about like if you want to conquer the island, you have to burn the boats. You have to kind of put yourself in a situation where you may not necessarily have a fallback. And so for people who are thinking about picking like a manager or those kind of things, they're like, do they have the right type of ways to get a deal? Do they have the right deal flow? Do they have the right sort of intuition about picking the right stocks or picking the right types of people, picking the right types of startups, those types of things. So seeing those qualities, I think, are really important. And so I think, from a standpoint of finding the right person, I think it's the fit. Do you see them with that sort of willingness to succeed or that will to succeed? I think is critical.
This is a really interesting discussion about different potential career pathways. And one thing that comes to mind is, let's say I'm really interested in entrepreneurship. I'm not just quite there yet to where I'm ready to go on my own, take an idea and be a founder, right? Or maybe move to VC, right? But I want to get involved in the process. When's a good time to reach out as a consultant or maybe someone who's a domain expert that works with these groups to give them information on, well, this looks like, based on my experience in X field, this looks pretty legit, or here are some of the problems. Is there a good point in one's career to head that way? Like, is there some threshold of, you have to have 5 years as a junior attending to be taken seriously in that regard? Or is it more of a, hey, we'll take whoever wants to help out?
Yeah, no, I think that there's very lots of different entry points. I've certainly seen people from sort of the different areas where, they're just out of medical school, but they've got an interest in an area or, just in training. So for me, I found that like getting involved in these local accelerators, like the Plug and Play Tech Center, there's, if you're on the East Coast, the Mass Challenge, those type of places where they're looking for people who have expertise in a field and they're looking for people who want to advise startups. So I think that's an easy way to kind of get connected, start getting into the ecosystem. You start seeing the pitch nights, and I've really found that many places across the country have really burgeoning venture ecosystems. So it's not necessarily always just in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, or on the East Coast in Boston. There are many new emerging hubs where there are these opportunities for people who have interest in innovation and startups, and pairing with their local universities. So I've advised a couple people that they have local innovations even in smaller areas, getting involved in that so that you can start to meet the people who are innovating and then making those relationships. So a lot of it is sort of getting out there, meeting the different places, getting to know your ecosystem. And then, you often will find that the opportunities eventually just kind of find you the more that you're out there and that people hear about what you're doing, what your interests are. At least that's my experience.
You mentioned Silicon Valley. Obviously, that's where you live, that's where you work and play. Silicon Valley is also the name of one of my favorite TV shows, HBO comedy. And obviously, it's a spoof, it's a satire, but a big recurring element there is VC, these venture capitalists, whether it's in dollars that this company, Pied Piper, is trying to raise, or in the personalities and stereotypes. And one of them is sometimes this kind of little bit of a dance where the people pitching a company or idea, they try to, in some ways, overstate or maybe sell something that might not have a lot of substance. But you're in a unique position because let's say someone's trying to pitch you on radiology, they want to try to overstate something or maybe present something that's not true. You've got a really robust set of priors to draw upon. But I'm curious, how has that maybe changed or informed your approach to VC in a way that might be different from traditional? You're focusing on radiology technologies. On one hand, I could see it maybe being an advantage for sure. You know a lot. But sometimes if we know too much, it's harder to think out of the box. So I can see all those possibilities. But what's your take on it? What's your experience been?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great thought. I mean, and because really, like, and I'm kind of glad in the way that I stepped out of my initial bubble of being at a large university and going and working in a private remote group, because it's allowed me to see that what I thought maybe was a challenge for one place, maybe not necessarily be the same challenge for the other place, or that there's lots of different challenges. So you're exactly right that you can be in a bit of a bubble and you can sort of see things only from, well, this is a problem for me, so that's a problem for everybody. But it's not necessarily the case. Like, one of the things when I first sort of started off was I spent time, I talked to about 50 different people or more across the spectrum from different types of practices, different types of training, different types of locations geographically to really try to get a sense of what are the challenges. And this kind of speaks to entrepreneurship in the same way they talk about customer discovery. And one of the programs that I often refer people to is the NSFI Core program, which they have you do 100 customer interviews to see, like, is this idea that's in my head, is it a problem? But if somebody picks up the phone and asks their colleague across the country if that's a problem, will they say yes? Will they say, I want to pay money for that? Or, this is a problem that I need solving. And so that was sort of the thought that I take to it, is that, I have a network of many different folks. Having been at UCSF for about 15 years, I was, fortunate to train a number of people who are now out in practice. And that has allowed me to have a great network of people to say, like, is this a challenge for you? This is what I see, but is this something that is challenging for others too? So, and I think that is one of the challenges from, say a generalist fund or something like that, because they're often relying more on an emotional decision. Well, oh, because my father had this condition and now I'm going to invest in them. But sometimes that may not necessarily be the right thing that goes across the board as a solution that's adopted. So that's definitely something that's good to keep in mind is, checking yourself, is that, like, is this something where it's a problem for me? So it must assume that it's a problem for everyone else when that may not necessarily be the case.
So speaking of emotion, obviously Silicon Valley show is trying to get us to laugh. But then I'm thinking of other things that probably more people are familiar with than your experience is things like Shark Tank, which I know is not exactly VC, but it's probably one of the most pervasive pictures of how do you pitch an investor. There's a podcast I like listening to called The Pitch from Vox Media that also supposedly has real life pitches. But I'm wondering, how close to reality are these things? They pitch them like, hey, they are actual pitches. But my guess is there's probably a lot of pageantry involved with it.
What I've heard for those shows is that, they'll say, oh yeah, we've got a deal. But then afterward, that's just the beginning. There's a lot of due diligence. There's a lot of time spent after those deals where they're vetting it. They're doing the customer discovery themselves. They're doing all the deep diligence on the founders, on the team, on all those pieces. So you're right that there's that sort of front end of, like, okay, I'm going to give you 100,000 for 10% of the company or something like that. Whereas, usually that's sort of the first part of it. In reality, the pitch in general is to, usually they say the goal is to get to the next meeting. So you have your first introductory pitch. It gives sort of enough of a hook to say, okay, now you can get 30 more minutes of my time. So it's sort of just unlocking next levels of things and sort of getting people enough so that they're interested in learning more, so that they start to develop conviction in your idea. Whether it be you're pitching the idea to a junior analyst or somebody who's at the beginning part of the firm and they need to sell that to the higher level investment committee, or something along those lines, where you really want to influence the people to make sure that they know your solution stands out, that you're the right person to do it, you've got the right team. right technology, the right timing. Those are all the things that you're trying to sell on the pitch. So
And I have a quick question here related to that, where, well, let's think about it from a few perspectives. Thinking about that first meeting, that first impression, from the perspective of someone who's coming to you with the next greatest idea, the next greatest app, what are some things that I should know to avoid to ensure that there's a second meeting, right? Are there any giveaways that you advise early founders to avoid? And the second thing, if you don't mind, is now as someone in your position who's vetting a pitch, is there anything that you do prospectively or think shouldn't be done prospectively to avoid any bias to where you can really focus on the core content, right? Or your understanding of the person and the group coming to you while filtering out the noise that may interfere with your ability to make a judgment, whether there should be that next meeting or further steps.
I think those are great questions. And as far as, things to avoid, I think it's just seeming like that you're overconfident, that there's never a situation where you don't know. I mean, I think knowing sort of that area of like, okay, this is an area that either, it's an area I don't know or we're not sure, but, having that confidence is saying, this is what I understand about the problem. This is what I understand about the technology, but, not going too deep or trying to make something up, particularly in the field where we know about the field, then you're going to find out soon that like, oh, they're just making stuff up, or they haven't really spent the time to think through the perspective of the actual end user. So I think those are important things of just, you want to sort of a balance of humility, but also, confidence and pride in the what your solution is. And, thinking about things through that you've thought through carefully about, you've got a laser path from point A to point B and how to get there, even if it may not be the right one, showing coachability. So I always think particularly for early stage investing, they talk about, the team. Are you the right team? Can you excite people about your idea? Can you get them motivated so that you can build a team around you? Do you have the people that can help balance out? Do you have a complementary set of skills? I think that's another really important thing. And really just the sort of EQ, or are they just generally nice to talk to? That you're going to be coachable so that if, there's going to be lots of different bumps along the road, and, are they going to be able to, take into consideration some of the challenges or advice and go from there? Or are they just going to be too headstrong and then may end up failing? So those are the ways that I sort of think about from that approach. And, as far as avoiding bias, I have the ways that I do it, I have standardized sets of questions so that I'm asking the same people the same thing every time, so that I have a kind of a same way to evaluate things. In the same way that when I was interviewing for faculty candidates, when I was a chief, or interviewing for fellows, those types of things, we want to make sure that you're considering the solution, the team, the person, thinking about all these things in a very sort of strategic way.
Well, it's good to hear that of that insider knowledge. So as Paul and I vibe code and create the next great app on our end, that's the secret. You're here to hear our pitch.
Yeah, this is actually our way to get a free initial meeting.
This was the first meeting, hopefully.
So we got a podcast that we want to pitch you on.
I'm sold.
Jesse, this has been really helpful. I think it's always interesting to hear about kind of what our guests are interested in hearing. And actually, it'll be really great to hear your thoughts on what gets you excited these days in the field. What's the kind of topic where you're looking forward to, this is going to be a great meeting, or maybe it's like, oh, okay, maybe there another one. Let's see where this goes, right? And we don't have to get to specifics. I know there's confidential information here, but any general trends that really get you excited about?
Definitely. For me, I think there's a lot of areas. They always talk about, AI is going to replace the radiologist and it's going to do that. But, for me, I find that there's so many other operational areas. There's so many other things that can make AI can use to make the radiologist stay more efficient or more impactful. Things that can unlock information that that we didn't have, that's sitting right in front of us, but either because we don't have the time, we don't have the type of computational resources to do so. Things that sort of are unlocking more the superpowers of what we're able to do is things that really get me excited. So some efficiency tools where they're able to take still in self, but they're taking summarization for EHR, and they're being able to take this information. One of the things that in my discovery that I was talking to lots of different people, a recurring theme or pain point was that like, I just can't get a good history. Like the more times I ask for a good history, I just get pain, or I just say see comments or something like that. And then I have to dig in the chart, or I have to spend time looking through Care Everywhere, and it's in some kind of obscure thing why they ordered the test. And so a solution that can help to match that and improve, so you don't have to go back and addend it, or they don't have to write off the cost. Things that can allow you to be more effective, but also for your department to be more capital efficient. So That's the other thing that I think is important is that you can have a great solution, but if you can't convince the hospital administration why they should pay for it, then it's really not going to go anywhere often. So you want something that's both been thought through from a financial standpoint as well as end user standpoint. So solutions that have sort of both of those, I think, are really, really exciting. Another trend I think is just getting information that is on the scan, but I don't have time to sort of segment out each individual thing, or I don't have time to do that. But what if I could extract out something like easily like the muscles for sarcopenia? Or what if I could have insights about a tumor, whether or not it will respond to a chemo or whether or not it will have a good prognosis or not? I was in tumor board and they asked me, what is it? Well, I would say based on my judgment, having been looking at these for many years, but what if you had something that has lifetimes worth of data that it can use to help you predict whether or not something will be bigger or smaller, whether it will respond to X chemo or that type of thing. So really things for me that get exciting are ones that have a good financial model about how they're going to be able to get somebody to approve it, but also that it's making an impact in a way that will allow the radiologist to be more effective and more efficient.
Do you always want to hear about AI somewhere in that pitch? Or is it true that, it's okay not to have AI as long as a problem's being solved, it's meeting those components that you described?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's going to be one of our sort of core areas is within that. But I think if it's solving a problem and if it's doing it in a way that is novel, that will impact efficiency or that will enable people to have care that maybe wouldn't have in another way, we're certainly interested. And from my standpoint, even if it is say something that's outside of my thesis, I have lots of folks in my network that I will refer them to that are investors that invest in other types of things. So I've certainly referred people that do Derm Path to another fund that is that's funding these type of areas. So, for me, sometimes even if it's not necessarily within my thesis, but if it's an area where I feel like I can add some value by making an introduction, I certainly will do that.
It's great to hear that there is that network and that, it's such a tight knit community, even beyond the clinical space, beyond the reading room as well. So that's great to hear and things definitely to look forward to. I think, we're at wrapping up our talk here, but we want to hear any final thoughts on the outlook for VC, for radiology, entrepreneurship, thoughts on what maybe clinicians who want to go into this space should be thinking about. Really open to anything that you'd like to share with us here.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I mean, I think this is really, I feel like we're at sort of an inflection point where the sort of the technology has caught up with the interest in being able to solve the problems that we've had for so many years. That, it used to be sort of a dream to be able to do some of the things that we're doing now. But I think, we have more people that are interested. And now with the ability that the technology is there, people can actually start to solve their own problems, or at least to start to get a first step in the way of starting to solve their problems. I was talking to a colleague who, he uses Claude to be able to help with some of his notes to summarize so that he can get optimal reimbursement or to fight the insurance company to be able to approve his interventional procedure. So things like that now that, would have been out of reach or would have been very challenging for people now with the technology, I think. So the timing, I think, is right for people who have ideas, who have interest in innovating in the space to start. And I think the barrier and the bar is much lower now for people to get out and try to innovate and to explore ideas.
So, as a final question, how are you using AI in your routine practice during VC work or personal life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for VC work, I use it for a number of things. I really feel like it has made me more efficient in what I'm able to do and being able to do things with just really myself and a limited number of folks. For instance, I use it for ingesting the PDFs, pitch decks to do an initial first pass. I give prompts of the types of things that I want in my investment memo to do an initial first pass for me to review. I use Google Gemini for that. I use it even for some LinkedIn posts of, I want to do a thought leadership about this idea, generate a very compelling image that make people may want to use to read it. I use a lot of things for the tools. One of the interesting tools that they have in my VC lab decile group is that they use Ask a Venture Legend, where they can take sort of the digitized personalities of some of the sort of top venture investors, and you can bounce questions off of them. Really, just it gives you just a different perspective, a different point of view, and sometimes looking at different problems, whether it be sort of negotiating, simulating negotiations, or how do you evaluate or how do you value this startup? And they're looking for this valuation, but I'm thinking about that. Using it to sort of bounce it off somebody. When I may not necessarily be able to pick up the phone and talk to Vinod Khosla, I can at least get sort of some idea that is somewhat similar to some of the themes that they may have posted about or that they published in general. So for me, I think it's a huge efficiency tool. You have to be careful because it can be very sycophantic. It can say, "Oh, that's a great idea. How brilliant." So I will often sort of cross-check it with the two other types of tools and sort of find like a ground truth or a middle ground that I'll use. So I found it a big efficiency gain, at least from my standpoint.
Well, Jesse, this is a great cliffhanger for Paul and I to tell you about our up and coming venture, our endeavor to create an app where you can chat with Paul and Ali.
Ali, you've said too much. You've said too much.
Probably what we think. Yeah. Only honesty and always happy support. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure. I think there's a lot to think about as we go forward. I'm sure more conversations will come from this, both within our domains and at the annual meeting. I feel like this is a kind of topic where more education is needed, and we'll keep an eye out for any up and coming resources that you have to share with us in our community.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate the chat. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here with us, Jesse.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Radiology Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Shout out to Yuri Ishimchisen for our podcast music and to the RSNA podcast staff.
Email us at podcasts@rsna.org anytime with questions, feedback, or suggestions.